my internet speed and I thought everything would be okay, but apparently not so much. Hi, my name is Leigh-Anne and I am a storyteller, as are you. And this is brought to you by Safe at Home Manitoba. It appears that I'm having some connection issues. I'm really hoping that you can all at least hear me. If you can't see me, there's a bit of a bump in the connection today. So behind me, you will see a village, and I set that up in my studio because these stories come from my memory growing up on Twin Pines Farm, which is near New Burketown, Manitoba. It looks to me like I'm having trouble again. Let's try that one time because I'm freezing up. Let's try it one more time. Yeah. Lots of issues today. I'm not sure why. Everything was fine. Yesterday was great, a little bit bumpy in places, but today it's tough. So if you didn't catch it earlier, my name is Leigh-Anne, and I am going to be sharing some stories from my memories of growing up on Twin Pines Farm near New Burketown, Manitoba. These stories are going to be told on Treaty 1 territory, and I just want to acknowledge that this treaty in 1871 was formed in an unfair way, and that the land belonged to the Anishinaabe peoples, and it was because of this treaty that my family was able to flee the Russian Revolution and find safety here in Canada. So I give thanks, and with gratitude, I was able to grow up as a farm kid in this country, but with full understanding of some of the suffering that took place in order for my childhood to happen. So I had this wonderful introduction for you all, but I think the video just doesn't want to play today. That's what you get for trying to upgrade your internet in the pandemic. I don't think we can have internet speeds fast enough to deal with all of this COVID traffic as we're all trying to communicate online these days. But it is my pleasure to be able to share some of these memory stories with you, and I hope that you will take the opportunity during this pandemic to gather with your family and come up with your own memories that you can grow into stories. And I say grow into stories because these are tall tales. So they live in my memory, but I have sprinkled them with the next door neighbor, which is imagination, and I've grown them. So there's a lot in there that's true, but there's also a lot in there that has been stretched. I'm not going to say false. I'm just going to say it's been stretched for interest's sake. Now that we've cleared that up, I think it's time for a story. So like I said, I grew up on Twin Pines Farm near a tiny village called New Burketown, Manitoba. You can see the little village behind me here, which represents my home community. And I thought, you know what, we've had enough of winter, so I would open up with a spring story. Now, when I was small, I was not tall at all. So my family called me Litzia, which basically means little Lee. And I thought if I have a nickname, then my older brother should have nicknames too. So I looked at my tall oldest brother, and in my mind, he kind of looked like a piece of licorice with arms and legs. Now, I should tell you, I gave him a different kind of a nickname back then, but I wish to this day that I had called him Licorice Boy, because I think he really was a licorice boy. And in this story, I'm going to call him Licorice Boy. Then my middle brother, he was strong, he was tough. He was my hero. And when I looked up at him, I thought he had such a brave face. And although long ago I gave him a different nickname, I would really think that I should have given him the nickname Brave Face. So then the three of us could have been Licorice Boy, Brave Face, and Little Leigh. And in my mind, that's who we were. And that's how we'll always be in my memory. So this story takes place in the spring when all of the snow behind the barn had melted into water, and it looked like a whole entire lake. And my brothers reminded me, Little Leigh, under that water there is mud, mud, icky sticky mud, 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 ookie ookie mud. Don't walk in that water, it could pull the boots right off of your feet. Not my strawberry shortcake boots, no way! But those boys were always trying to find ways to keep us entertained. We didn't have a TV. Huh? We didn't have an internet. Oh, we didn't play video games. We played outside. Now, on that farmyard, there was an old shed that had fallen down. And sometimes when things fall down on a farmyard, you don't just clean them up. You leave them lying around a bit to see if you can build something new with them. So they found some long planks of wood, and they were nailing them together. And I said, oh, I know what we're doing. We're going to build a bridge across Muddy Field Lake. Yeah. Nope, Little Leigh, that's not what we're doing. Oh, what? What are we doing? What are we doing? You'll see. Oh, they always said that. You'll see. Never telling me, just making me wait. And I didn't have a lot of patience, you know what I'm saying? Well, eventually I could see that they had built a raft. And we dragged it down to Muddy Field Lake, and we threw it into the water. 1, 2, 3, splash! And it floated for about 3 seconds, and then it sank, blub, 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 blub. But those boys, they wouldn't give up so easily. They dragged that raft back onto the shore, and they thought about it. Now, in my memory, I'm not quite sure what they attached to the bottom, but in my memory, I think it was sort of a rubber dinghy, and Brave Face found it in the back of the shed, and he blew it up. And then we stuck it to the bottom of the raft, and we tied it on the bottom with strong hay bale twine. Nothing can defeat the strength of hay bale twine. You don't ever want to get tied up with hay bale twine. And then we checked it to see if it would float. 1, 2, 3, splash! It floated, and it didn't sink. Well, Licorice Boy, he said, I'll be the first one to try it. And he stretched out one of his long licoricey legs and the other long licoricey leg, and he stood on there. Wow! And he was so slim, and his jacket was hanging off of him. It kind of looked like he was a flagpole, and his jacket was the flag. Arr, matey, you turned it into a pirate raft. Then it was my turn, and I never wanted to go, But you cannot be afraid. When you have 2 big brothers and you're growing up on a farm, they make you do things even if you don't want to. So Brave Face, he just picked me up and he plunked me on the raft. And you know what? I'm glad I grew up with those boys, because they gave me a sense of adventure and a sense of I can do it. Well, Brave Face, he said, all right, I'll be jumping on board. No, jumping. And in my memory, it was ramped up in slow-mo. He came running up to the raft, and he flew up into the air. When he landed with a bam, and the raft went up and down and up and down and up and down. Oh, I think I'm going to lose my lunch. Now, those boys, they liked to freak me out. And I'll never forget, on this day, the 2 of them went to one side of the raft, and all their heavy weight made the other side go uppity, uppity, up, 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 up. And I was trying to hold that other side down, and I let go of a scream. And when you scream and you're the youngest in the family, your mother always hears you. And even though she was inside the farmhouse, she heard. And she threw on her boots, and she threw on her spring jacket, and she came running down to Muddy Field Lake. And then she stopped at the shed. Wonder what she's doing in there. And she came out with a hockey stick, and she was smacking it on her hand, and I thought, uh-oh, we're in trouble. And when she got to the raft, she looked at my brothers, who were just a bit taller than her, and she said, boys, do you know that the lake is very deep in the middle? You never thought about that, Mom. Well, that's why I'm here to think for you. Sometimes teenagers, they need an adult to think for them, just for a little while, because their brains aren't quite ready to think all the things through. And she said, well, if you promise to stay on the shoreline, don't go to the middle where little Leigh could drown. We don't have any life jackets, you know. I think you're going to need a paddle. And she handed the hockey stick to Brayface. You know what I think he said? I think he said, thanks, Mom. I thought I was going to have to use Licorice Boy as a paddle. Well, Mom, she walked away very hesitantly, and I had to put my fate in the hands of my big brothers. I always had to put my fate in the hands of those big boys. And usually, maybe sometimes, they looked out for me. The rest of the time, they played tricks on me. But this was a lot of fun. It was like we were in Egyptian times on the Nile River with a raft and a long bamboo pole. Brayface, he stuck the hockey stick down into the mud and he pulled it out again. And that's how we made our way around the edges of Muddy-filled Lake. And we were really a group of pirates. Our mateys. We even found some treasure. I pulled a rubber tire up out of the mud and I sat on it, and it made me feel like the queen of all pirates everywhere. Arr, you are all my mateys. Now, we made our way all the way around and waved at some people on the farmyards as we went by. It was a really big lake. There'd been a lot of snow that year. And we pulled that raft back up on shore. And we heard Mom honking the horn for dinner, you know, because it's such a big farmyard. She didn't ring a cowbell, but she did honk the horn to say, dinner's ready. And we all came running back to the farmhouse. And I wish I could say that the story ends there. But it doesn't. I'm guessing this story took place on a weekend because there's no school time in this story. The very next day, we went back out to the raft, and it was a beautiful sunny day. And those boys, they sometimes like to dare me. And they were not supposed to dare me. It was against the family rules. But on this day, they said, hey, little Leigh, why don't you stand on the raft all by yourself? You're not supposed to dare me. You're not supposed to dare me. What's the matter? Are you chicken? I am not a chicken. I don't live in a coop. I don't lay eggs. I don't have feathers. When you pick me up, I don't poop in your hand. Yes, I will stand on the raft all by myself, but only if you hold on to it so it doesn't float away to the middle where the water goes over my head. Well, the boys held on to the raft, just like I said. And actually, as I put out one leg and then the other leg and sort of shimmied over to the middle of the raft, I felt pretty good about myself. Look at this, all by myself on a raft. But you know, sometimes in spring, the air can be very still for a long time, but suddenly the wind begins to blow. They call that a spring gust. And on this day, it was as if the spring gust was waiting for me to stand on that raft all by myself. And it blew so hard that the boys cried out, little Leigh, we can't hold on anymore. Jump to shore. And I answered, I can't jump anywhere. I'm frozen with fear. And I'm really wishing I didn't have so much orange juice for breakfast. I'm feeling it in my socks. Well, those boys, they let go. And the raft floated out to the middle of Muddy-filled Lake. And there it got stuck on a piece of ice. I couldn't even paddle myself back to shore. And I could see the boys running back and forth like little tiny people, like elves far away. And I knew it was time to sound the alarm. Every child who is born last in a family, and especially if she has two older brothers, is born with a siren deep inside her or his belly. And this was the kind of situation to use my siren alarm. I wound up and I let it fly. Mommy! Even though she was in the farmhouse, she could hear me. Oh, what's wrong with my little Leigh? And she threw on her boots and she threw on her jacket and she ran down to Muddy-filled Lake. And I don't know what she said to them, but it looked something like this. Suddenly, those boys, they were walking through the mud, icky, sticky mud, the mud, ooky, ooky mud, and the mud was trying to pull those boots right off their feet. It took such a great effort. And then the water went up, up, up to the top of their boots, and it went whoosh down to their toes. And because it had just been snowed, it was very cold. And I'll never forget the looks on their faces. Oh, oh. And when I saw the looks on their faces, you know, I'd been crying a lot. I'd been crying my eyes out and putting them back in again for later. And my tears, they started to dry up. Is it cold? Is it cold? And those boys said, be quiet, we're coming to rescue you, you know. When they got to the raft, they started pushing me back to shore, and the water was way past their waist. And I said, hurry up, I'm cold. And they said, what do you think we are? We're cold, we're freezing. And we were almost to the shore when Braveface said, oh no, I lost my boot. No time to look for your boot. You're supposed to rescue me. When we came out of the water and dragged the raft onto shore, Braveface came out with one boot foot and one sock foot. And that sock foot was covered in that mud, icky, sticky, ooky, mud. His foot looked enormous. His foot looked huge. I said, that's the foot of a mud monster. He took off his sock and he held it in the air, and it really looked like it was a mud monster foot. Mom said that doesn't go anywhere near my washing machine. So we left it there to dry in the sun and maybe to give to a museum or something, because mud monster feet are very rare. Well, when we got back to the house, we sat down and we had cookies and hot chocolate, and we were all dried up and warm. And Dad came home, and I told him the whole story and fast forward, because in the village of New Berkta, I was known for talking too much and really fast and a whole lot. In fact, one of my teachers, when I grew up and I was a bit older, he came from that village and he said, Miss Leigh-Anne Kehler, if you could get paid for talking too much, you'd be a very rich lady. Well, now I get paid for talking, but I'm not very rich. But I'll tell you that I told my dad the whole story. I said, Dad, we went down to the muddy field lake. The boys said, go on the raft all by yourself. I said, no, you're not supposed to, Dammy. But I'm not a chicken, so I stood on the raft. Along came the wind, it went. The boys couldn't hold, and I went away to the middle of the muddy field lake. I cried, Mommy, 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 Mommy. She came running. She said, boys, go get your sister. They walked through the lake. They rescued me. They pushed me back to the shore. But Braveface left his boot in the water. It's still there. That's it. There's no more. Well, Dad looked down at me, and I'm sure he said, you got to speak slower. My ears don't hear so quickly. Now, the water from that lake flowed away down to the ditches and off to the rivers. And I'm sure we spent a lot of time floating paper boats on the ditch water, because it was really, really high, and we could watch those boats float forever. And I would often imagine that I was on those boats having a wonderful cruise somewhere hot and far away from cold Manitoba. And when that water was gone and the land dried up, there was Braveface's boot sticking up out of the ground. Now, I don't know how long it was actually there, but in my memory imagination, I think it was there for several years. I imagine my father planting the seeds around it as he plowed the fields and planted. And I imagine that every time we went by it on our bicycles, I would say, hey, boys, look at that rubber buddy boot. That's a reminder you're always supposed to take care of me. And even though the boot finally did disappear, probably some mice had made a home in it and chewed through a hole in the toes, and probably the sun had turned it from a black to a green to a sort of bleached out white color, and finally it went back into the soil. Even though it's gone, that boot will always be there in my memory. And I do think that memories, sprinkled with a bit of imagination, make the best stories. I want to show you a picture. I thought I had it ready to go here. I think it got stuck on the bottom of my pile. It's a picture of my father when he was the age that I was in this story. So he's quite little, and he is enjoying, here it is. He is enjoying his dad's rubber boots. So kids growing up on farms would often like to dress up in their parents' clothes and imagine that they were grown up and big. And I think that's a really cute picture of him, probably taken, oh goodness, about, I'd say about 80 or 82 years ago. There's my good old dad. Now, before I tell you more stories about Twin Pines Farm, I do want to try and play a video for you. And this was created with filmmaker Randy Guest, who is well known for turning storytelling into little movies. And if you go to his website, Randy Guest Choose a Crowd Productions, you will find that there are a lot more movies to watch there. So let me just see if I can get it up and going. And this is a wintry story. Unfortunately, we're heading back to winter, but let's see if I can get it going and you can enjoy it.
This first story is from the public domain, which basically means it comes from long, long ago. Now, it's a fairy tale about Grandfather Frost. I'm sure you've heard of Jack Frost, but this is Jack's grandpapa, and he's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
I am having trouble with my video playback today. I haven't had any trouble so far. Let me see if it's caught up. I don't want to have us stuck here for too long. I think it may have caught up. Let's give it a try.
He rides on the north wind. His hair is made of icicles, and he has long, icy fingers. On his face, because he's ancient, you would see wrinkles. On his wrinkles. On his wrinkles. But the story doesn't begin with Grandfather Frost. The story begins with Needlemaker and his daughter. Now, they lived deep in the woods in a tiny cottage, and it was a convenient place for them to live, for you see, at this time, people were still sewing their own clothes. But of course, if you want to sew, you need needle and thread. Well, the forest provided tiny twigs from the branches, and together, the daughter and her father would whittle them until they were sharp and pointy enough to cut through the material. Then they would poke tiny holes in the needle to make room for the thread. When they had enough needles, they would pile them high, in summertime in the back of the wagon, and in wintertime in the back of the sleigh. Then off to market they would go with their horse. Trot, 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 trot. Now, Needlemaker's daughter was getting older, and although the story doesn't tell us her name, we all know that when you're getting older, sometimes you just don't want to do what your parents are doing. Sometimes you just want to go it on your own. So, one cold winter's day, as the sleigh was piled high with needles ready to go to market, the father looked at his daughter and he asked, "Oh, my girl, do you really want to go to market with me?" "Honestly, father, not so much." Then he gave her an offer. "Why don't you stay at home in our tiny cottage? I know you can look out for yourself." "Oh, yes, I can," she said. "I know just what to do. I have a few dried berries left over from the summertime, and I have some vegetables from our garden still left behind, and if I get really hungry, I can always snare a rabbit and make rabbit stew. And to entertain myself, I can sing with the birds, la 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 la, or I can dance with the deer." "Oh, yes, father, let me be alone. Let me prove that I can manage it all by myself." Well, no sooner had she said this than her father leapt up into the sleigh and guided the horses, and they all trotted away. Well, at first it was very exciting. She cleaned the cottage from top to bottom. Then she bundled up and went outside and enjoyed some scampering squirrels in nearby trees. But as the days and nights went by, she began to worry about her father. Usually a trip to the market would take at most 2 days and 2 nights, but a whole week, and then 10 days, and then 14 days had gone by, and still he'd not arrived at home. She began to worry and wonder, what if he's been eaten by a pack of wild wolves? The very next morning, much to her relief, Needlemaker's daughter heard the familiar ringing of sleigh bells, and she knew Father's home. She ran to the window of their tiny cottage and breathed her hot breath on the ice that had gathered there overnight. She looked out, and she saw that her father had arrived with the sleigh and the horses, and sitting beside him, there was a woman. And sitting in the back of the sleigh, there was a girl, possibly her age. Well, she was so excited. She threw on her warm coat, and she headed outside. She ran to the sleigh, and she looked up at the woman, and she said, "Let me introduce myself. I know who you are," answered the woman. And then Needlemaker's daughter noticed that she had a very blue tinge to the skin on her face, not unlike the people of the north that she had heard about in stories. "I'll tell you who I am. I am your new stepmother, and you will do whatever I say." And the girl at the back cried out as well, "Yes, I'm your new stepsister, and you will do whatever I say." Now, I don't know the new stepsister's name, but I can tell you this. If I were to give her a name, I'd call her Sour-Faced Girl. Oh, she looked like she'd been sucking on lemons all her life. And I can tell you how that happens to a person. It's when you think only thoughts of yourself that your face begins to change. Me, 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 me. Perhaps she was born quite beautiful, but now she had the face of selfishness. Once inside the cottage, there was no end to the demands of the new stepmother and the new stepsister. "Brush my hair, make me a new dress. Oh, I'm hungry, give me something to eat. Polish my shoes, clean this cottage. I won't walk on a floor that's so dirty. And the worst of all, clip my toenails." Now, I don't know about you, but if this was my life, I'd get pretty miserable. Well, Needlemaker's daughter, she decided to make the best of it. So even though they made great demands of her, every day, morning, noon, and night, she would sing along with the birds who were always gathering outside the window, even in the coldest days of winter. La 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 la, as she swept the floor. La 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 la, as she washed the dishes. La 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 la, as she brushed her stepsister's hair. And because she chose to be happy no matter her circumstances, she grew more and more beautiful. And the stepmother grew more and more jealous. She began to plot. I need a plan, a way of getting rid of her. And on one of winter's coldest, iciest days, that stepmother woke with a smile. "Oh, I'm hungry for strawberries." Then she looked down at her new stepdaughter, the Needlemaker's daughter, and she said, "You will take this empty basket, go into the woods, and find me some strawberries." "I'd love to do that, yes, but strawberries only grow in the summertime. I suppose we'll have to wait." "I don't want to wait. But don't worry, child. I have made a warm coat and hat and boots for you. I made them out of my love for you." Then she went to the closet, and she took out a coat made of paper, a hat made of paper, and boots made of paper. Oh, Needlemaker's daughter didn't want to be ungrateful, so she took them, and she put them on, and she took the empty basket, and she headed out into the cold, wintry forest. As Needlemaker's daughter made her way through the woods, she felt the cold winds whipping through the paper coat. She knew that she would have to have the warmest thoughts to keep herself from freezing to death that day. So she closed her eyes, and she imagined swimming in a warm river in the hot sun, jumping in the water with the fish, butterflies flitting on the wind, deer dancing past. And as she was thinking these thoughts, she warmed so greatly from the inside out that every step she took melted the snow beneath her feet. But still the trouble of the strawberries. Where to find them? She sat under the protection of a pine tree, and as she sat there, thinking of where strawberries might grow in the wintertime, Grandfather Frost flew by. Well, Grandfather Frost landed at the top of this pine tree, and he called out to Needlemaker's daughter, "Child, are you warm?" She could not see him, but she could hear him, so she answered, "Yes, I have my warm thoughts to keep me so. I am quite warm, whoever you are." Then he leapt from branch to branch, shaking the snow off the tree as he made his way closer and closer to Needlemaker's daughter. In the middle of the tree he called out, "Child, are you toasty?" And she answered him, "Yes, I am quite toasty all the way down to my toesies, whoever you are." Finally, he leapt from branch to branch until he could jump out in front of her. And he cried out, "Child, are you happy?" And she answered him, "Yes, I am quite happy. I have a safe home and a warm place to live and food for my belly, but what would truly make me happier is if I could find strawberries that grow in winter's snow." Well, Grandfather Frost could see that this girl was truly filled with a warmth coming from her joyful heart. So he lifted an icy finger and he pointed at the snow. And right then and there, strawberries began to grow, first with long green vines, then tiny white flowers, followed by tiny green strawberries, and finally, fresh, ripe, red strawberries, ready for the picking and the plucking. Well, no sooner had Needlemaker's daughter filled her basket than Grandfather Frost had disappeared, jumping up on a cold gust of wind. Well, she ran back to the cottage, so excitedly, ready to share her sweet surprise with her new family. Needlemaker threw open the door so excitedly. "Look what I've brought you! Strawberries! Winter strawberries!" But she had no time to explain that Grandfather Frost had helped her to find them, for you see, the stepmother grabbed the basket and she gobbled up those strawberries. She left only one tiny green one. "Here, you take it. I've no use for it." But because the Needlemaker's daughter had patience, she knew that if she took the green strawberry and put it in her pocket, maybe in a few days it would be ripe and ready to eat. The following morning, stepmother was again hungry for strawberries. But this time she turned to her own daughter, the stepsister, and she said, You will go into the woods and bring back strawberries today." "Me? Not me. I just want to sit here waiting for the prince." But it was no use. The stepmother bundled up her own daughter, not in paper, but in warm clothes. After all, she was her own flesh and blood, gave her the empty basket, and booted her out the door. As the sour-faced stepsister made her way through the icy winds and the wintry cold, she didn't have a single warm thought to keep her company. "I'm so cold! I need a prince to rescue me!" Then she sat down under the shelter of that same pine tree. Well, you might know who happened to come by. Riding on the north wind, oh yes, it was him, Grandfather Frost, with his wrinkles and his icy hair and his long icy fingers. And as he landed on the top of the tree, he cried out, "Child, are you warm?" And though she could not see him, she could hear him. And sour-faced stepsister cried out, "Of course I'm not warm, whoever you are. I'm sitting in the snow under a tree in the middle of the woods." Well, he leapt from branch to branch, growing ever closer to sour-faced girl. And then he cried out, "Child, are you toasty?" And she answered him, "Of course I'm not toasty. What do you think I am, a piece of bread?" Well, he leapt from branch to branch until finally he jumped out in front of her and he asked that question, "Child, are you happy?" "Of course I'm not happy. Look at me. I'm so cold. I'm frozen." And you know what? She truly was frozen through and through. For Grandfather Frost knew what to do. He simply breathed his icy breath. And she became an ice statue. Then he leapt up on the wind and flew away. And so the story might have ended that day, but for a very brave stepsister, Needlemaker's daughter, back at the cottage. When the sun began to go low, she put on her warmer clothes, and she went out into the woods searching for her lost sister. And when she came upon her, frozen as ice, it was as if something in her heart told her what to do. She reached into the pocket and found that strawberry, and it had ripened there. And when she placed it on her sister's tongue, her sister began to thaw with the warmth of not just the strawberry, but the love that it took to give it to her. Oh, thank you! Thank you, she cried! And for the first time in a long time, her face was not sour, and the two of them embraced, and they skipped through the woods back to the cottage, sisters, hand in hand. When the two of them arrived home, they could see that stepmother had truly been worrying about them. I suppose a little bit of the ice around her own heart had melted away. And she said, "Girls! Girls, you're home!" And she wrapped her arms around them. And I must say that from that moment on, they all became quite a happy family. And together they lived in that tiny cottage in the woods. And there was no need of a prince to come and rescue those girls, for they grew up happily as sisters. And one might even say that they lived happily ever after.
Well, that story gives me a memory from my childhood growing up on Twin Pines Farm near New Burketown, Manitoba. In the story that you just heard, Needlemaker's daughter saved her sister by offering up a strawberry. Well, this picture is a long ago picture of an artwork made by my eldest brother, Licorice Boy. And I like to show off this picture because I want to tell everyone how amazing he was with snow. Now you can tell that this is springtime because we don't have snow piled up to the top of the barn. Long ago, we used to have big blizzards and a lot of snow, and sometimes we could even go tobogganing from the hayloft out into the open fields behind the barn. But in springtime, the snow was perfect texture to make snow carvings, and you can see he's made a dinosaur. Well, I was always looking for new places to read. Sometimes I would read by sitting on the cow's back. Sometimes I would read by climbing up my favorite tree. Never in the treehouse, though. The boys put up a sign that said, "No girls allowed, especially little sisters." I was never allowed up there. But one day I decided to go into the mouth of that snow dinosaur. And as I was sitting there reading, of course, because it was springtime, I guess because I was shuffling around inside of that mouth, suddenly it felt like the mouth closed, and I was kicking and yelling, "Help! Help! Help!" Well, my brothers came running, and they dug me out of the mouth of that snow dinosaur. Although it might have been a dragon, I'm not certain. Memory can be rusty that way. That's why we have to sometimes rely on imagination. I was so grateful to my brothers. They had saved me. They had rescued me. Well, sometimes, of course, my brothers were not rescuing me. They were trying to play some kind of tricks on me. And I should get a picture. Here we go. This is long ago when my dad was with my grandpa feeding the chickens. Now, that's a different farm, but it is in the village of New Burketown. So it comes from the same area of Manitoba. And those chickens were just wandering around, free as a bird. Well, they were birds. They couldn't fly away anyway, so it wasn't a big deal to leave them like that. But on our farm, we kept the chickens in a coop. Now, I should warn you, if you are a vegetarian, or if stories about goopy things or mucky or yucky or bloody things bother you, you might not want to listen to this one. Farm stories are often about getting the animals ready for the supper table. And I'll never forget when my grandfather, the guy you saw in that picture, he had 2 chopping blocks. And we were going to prepare those chickens to put them in the freezer for the long winter that was ahead. And my dad was on one chopping block and my grandpa was on another. And Braveface and Licorice Boy, they said, "Hey, little Lee, why don't we have a headless chicken race?" I said, "A headless chicken race? What's that?" And they said, "We'll show you. You see, when a chicken is headless, it wants to borrow your will to live. Well, that's kind of scary. What are you telling me? They said, oh, but it can be a lot of fun. You see, when the head's missing, the chicken will run after you. I don't know if I want a headless chicken running after me. But then our grandpa got in on the joke. He said, all right, little Lee, we're going to have a race. The boys will run and their headless chicken will chase them, and you will run and your headless chicken will chase you, and the headless chicken that goes the furthest, well, that person with that headless chicken will win a whole dollar. A whole dollar? That was a lot of money back then. I could buy maybe 3 chocolate bars. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of chocolate. Well, my dad and my grandpa, they brought the chickens out of the coop, and I was a little scared for them, but I knew it had to be done if I wanted to have chicken dinner later on in the wintertime. And they put the chickens down on the chopping blocks, and we were lined up, Brave-Face and Licorice Boy in front of one chopping block and me in front of the other chopping block, and they went 1, 2, 3, hi-ya! And the heads were gone, and the headless chickens were on the grass, and my brothers weren't kidding. Those chickens would follow you wherever you went, and I was freaking out. This headless chicken just running after me. I thought I could hear it go, bark, 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 but it didn't because, it didn't have a head. And I was running and running and running. Well, the boy's headless chicken, it didn't go very far. It ran a little bit and then went flop in the grass. My headless chicken, it really wanted to borrow my will to live. I must have had a strong will to live. So I was running. It was following, flapping its wings. And I couldn't escape from it. It felt a little bit like a nightmare. And I ran up the steps of the hayloft. And I was grabbing for the hayloft door, but I was too short. Little Lee was too short to reach the handle. And the chicken was hopping up after me. It was scarier even than the Frankenstein. Thankfully, it finally flopped down on the stairs right before it landed on my bare feet, which would have been kind of gross because there was blood squirting everywhere. I warned you, not a story for a vegetarian. But I am proud to say that because I faced the headless chicken that day, I received the $1 reward. Ha ha ha. And from that day on, every year, when it was time to get the chickens ready to put in the freezer, I would always say, hey, how about a headless chicken race? And the boys usually said yes. But I'll never forget the day when they got too old to play with their little sister, and they started to say no. Now, I have a story for you that jumps all the way from summertime and chicken time to fall. Our dad gathered us around one night, and he told us, hey, kids, do you know that old Mr. Boer is still living in this farmhouse? What do you mean? Who's old Mr. Boer? Why is he living here? Why haven't I seen him? Well, said Dad, we bought this house from young Mr. Boer. Then old Mr. Boer used to live in it on young Mr. Boer's farmyard. You took the house away from old Mr. Boer? That's not nice. No wonder he still wants to live in it. But why don't I ever see him? Dad said, well, because he's gone. How can I see him if he's gone? That doesn't make any sense. He's really gone. What did he do? Go to Winnipeg, the big happening city of Winnipeg? I want to go there soon, and maybe even New York City. Get away from the village people that live in Alberta. Actually, I really loved growing up with them, and you only realize till much later how much you appreciate the people you've known all your life. Well, Dad said, he's gone. What do you mean he's gone? And the boy said, he's dead, little Lee. He's dead? We're living in the house of a dead guy? No! Dad said, don't worry. He was always a really friendly farmer. He always wore a straw hat. And he would wave that straw hat at the farmers as they went by. Well, all summer long, I was searching for that straw hat. Was it hanging in the barn? Was it up in the hayloft? I wanted some evidence of this Mr. Boer. Now, his name was Boer, but I like to think he was Boer. And I didn't find any evidence, but in the night when the stairs would go creak, 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 and my parents, they had their own bedroom, and Licorice Boy and Brave-Face, they had their own bedroom, but my bedroom was just a hallway at the top of the stairs. My door was just a blanket like a curtain on a rope. I didn't have much privacy back then, and when the stairs would go creak, 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 the boys would stick their heads out of their bedroom door and say, hey, little Lee, that's Mr. Boer walking on the stairs. I said, I know that. I'm not scared. He's a friendly farmer with a waving straw hat. And my mother says that she remembers me sitting on those stairs in the middle of the night, eating an Oreo cookie and holding up another one. And when she asked me, what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm just giving Mr. Boer a snack. That's what. Now, it was Halloween. And I was dressed in my favorite costume. I was a cat. My barn was filled with like about 33 cats. So I loved to dress up like a cat. And the boys, they were ready to go trick-or-treating. They weren't wearing a costume. So Mom said, you boys have to dress up. And she made them put on her dresses, which was really funny. Lipstick and all. I loved it. And then Dad was sitting at the table and he kind of was coughing and he said, kids, I can't take you trick-or-treating. Aw, well, what are we going to do? Trick-or-treat around the farmyard? Halloween trick-or-treat? Cow moo. Give me some of your salt lick. I don't think so. Well, Mom said, don't worry, I'll take you trick-or-treating. And I know you're disappointed because your father's more fun than I am. So I'll let you trick-or-treat until you fill the trunk of the car with candy. Oh, that's a lot of candy. We usually only get one pillowcase full. Well, we took off trick-or-treating in the nearby town of Altona, and we had that trunk so full you could barely close it. And on the way back to the farm, we were singing into our Tootsie Rolls at the back of the car. Halloween, Halloween, Halloween is here. Cats and bats and monkey hats, but I don't feel the fear. I guess we were filling my mom's head with a bit of an ache. So she slammed on the brakes and she said, kids, get out and walk the rest of the way. You want us to walk on Halloween night, Mom? That's crazy. There are bats in the air, witches flying everywhere. Brave Face and Licorice Boy, they said, don't worry about it. We'll look out for you. Yeah, sure you'll look out for me. Yeah, right. And I don't know how it happened, but suddenly we were standing on the dirt road holding our Tootsie Rolls, and Mom, she was just driving away, filling the air with dust, and we had to walk the last mile home. Back then, they still measured things in miles. They still kind of do anyway, but we don't say it that way. We say kilometers, but back then it was miles. And as we walked along, the boys were trying to freak me out. Hey, little Lee, what's that crawling in the ditch? Don't try to scare me. I'm not scared. Hey, little Lee, what's flying in the air? Don't try to scare me. I'm not scared. But when we got to the top of our driveway, we saw the old gnarly tree. And sometimes it had an owl up in its branches, a barn owl that would live in the barn and sometimes fly to the top of the farmyard to act as guard and sentinel of Twin Pines Farm. Sometimes it would say, hoo, hoo, you, hoo, hoo, you, hoo, hoo. Don't you know yourself? But on this night, it didn't look like a barn owl. There was something much bigger in the tree. And it had a straw hat. And it was wearing kind of like man's clothes, but they were flapping in the wind. And I said, boys, I think that's Mr. Booer. And they said, oh, little Lee, that's just a story that Dad tells us to keep us entertained. But I think they were still a little afraid too, even though they wouldn't admit it. Then the thing in the tree said, I am Mr. Booer. Well, those boys, they took off running. They left me sitting there all standing there all by myself, and they ran to the farmhouse, and they jumped inside, and they slammed the door. Once again, I was frozen with fear and really wishing I hadn't had so much Kool-Aid to drink because I was feeling it in my socks. Well, I didn't know what to do, and Mr. Booer just flew over my head, and he landed on the ditch on the other side of the road. Then he popped his head out, boo! And I remembered that legs are for running. And I took off, running to the farmhouse, and he was running behind. Well, ghosts don't really run. That should have been my first clue. And when I got to the farmhouse, those boys had locked me out. I pounded on the door. Boom, 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 boom. I'd lost my voice from fear. Boom, boom, boom. Finally, Mother opened the door. She said, little Lee, is it a problem? And I jumped into the house, and I slammed the door, and I found my voice. It's Mr. Boer, Mr. Boer, Mr. Boer. And I guess he caught up and he pounded on the door. And the boy said, hey, little Lee, open the door. We dare you. Well, when they dare me, I just have to do it. Because I don't want to be a chicken. I'm not the kind of little sister that's a chicken. So I put my hand on the doorknob. I put my hand on the doorknob. Boom, boom, boom. I put my hand on the doorknob and I turned that knob and I opened the creaky old farmhouse door. And there he stood, wearing the straw hat and a sheet from my parents' bed and my dad's rubber boots. I am Mr. Boer. And he lifted the sheet and revealed himself. I'm also your father. Happy Halloween, little Lee. Daddy, what do you get me out that way? I'm just a little Lee after all. But we went back to the tree and we saw that Dad had hooked up a zip line and that he had floated something over our heads that looked a bit like a ghost wearing a straw hat. And then he was ready to pop out of the grass and chase us. And you know, to this day, I'm so glad that he did that for us because what a great memory. And I think memories make for great stories. I have one last story for you before I say goodbye. And it's the story of the great snowstorm. So we started in spring, we went through fall, and now we're back at winter. And I should show you a picture. This is from, I don't know, I think it's 1947. There is, this is the one I want. There we go. There is my dad and my grandpa. My dad standing on top of the barn with the snow as high as the barn itself. So I was talking about those great snowstorms of long ago, long before global warming, and there you have the proof. And actually, we had such a snowstorm when I was a little kid, and we were down in the basement for 3 days and 3 nights. And finally, after spending all that time in the darkness because the power had gone out, gathered around a wood stove, huddling there, cooking our food on the stove, playing board games by the light of the stove. We didn't have a TV or internet, not on that farm, not long ago. And finally, we heard the radio man say, "Storm's over, time to dig out." Well, we ran upstairs, and I'll never forget the sight. The snow had fallen so hard and so fast, it was up above the windows. "We're stuck in here like mole people," I cried to my family. Then I ran for the kitchen door, and I'm pretty sure they called out to me, maybe in slow-mo, "No!" And I pulled on that door, and all the snow came avalanching in. "Who else said, Dad, we're going to have to dig ourselves out? Now we really are mole people." And Mom said, "If you're going to be digging, even though you're inside, the snow is very cold, you'll have to put on your outside clothes." "Outside clothes? You mean the red snowsuit?" Oh, I hated that snowsuit. It had been passed down from Licorice Boy to Brave Face and now me. And it had patches on the elbows and patches on the knees and patches even on the butt. And Mom always asked 5 questions before I could put it on. And I hated those questions. Always the same every time. "Little Leigh, do you have to go pee?" "No, Mom, stop asking me." "Little Leigh, do you have to go pee-pee?" "I don't have to go 1 piece or 2 piece or 3 piece or 4 piece. Stop asking me." "Little Leigh, do you have to skip to the loo?" "Why should I skip to loo? I don't even know him. You say don't talk to strangers." "Little Leigh, do you have to visit the toilet?" "I'm not going to visit the toilet. What should I say? Hello, toilet? "Little Leigh, do you have to—" "No, I don't have to go, Mama. No, no, no." Now, she was right to ask me and to be certain, because it took so long to put that snowsuit on, and the rusty old zipper, zip, always got stuck in my chin. And the toque, Mama put that toque down over my eyebrows, and the hood over top, and the scarf that Grandma had knitted me would go round and round and round and round and round and round, and "I can't breathe." And Mom would say, "Good, you'll be warm." And I had a trick. I put my mitts on next, and that meant somebody had to put my boots on for me, and my kindergarten teacher just loved that part of it. Well, we started to dig in the snow. First, we dug out of the house. Dig a, dig a, dig a, dig a, dig a, dig a, dig. Then we dug up to break through the surface of the snow. Dig a, dig a, dig a, dig a, dig a, dig a, dig. And you know what? To this day, I will always remember the sparkling, pristine, diamond shapes in the sunlight of that snow. I felt like we landed on the moon. The trees looked like some sort of snowy creatures. And everything was so silent and so still. The top of the snow was really hard and crusty from all the wind blowing by. So we didn't fall through. We just walked on it like settlers on the moon. Now those boys, they were digging down to down to down down to down to down to down to down down to down to the ground. What are you doing? What are you doing? You'll see. And they pulled out the toboggan. They had remembered the last place we had put it before the snowstorm. Well, that snow had piled up to the roof of the house, so the boys put the toboggan on the roof. I said, "No way, not doing it." But when you're a little sister growing up on a farm with 2 big brothers, you just do things because they make you. Well, Licorice Boy, he was at the front of the toboggan, and they plunked me in the middle, sister in the brother sandwich, always sister in the brother sandwich. And Brave Face, he gave it a mighty push. 1, 2, 3, and he flew up in the air, and he landed with a bam, and we took off. Across the farmyard, bye-bye chicken, see you later cow, moo, out into the open field. We even passed a guy on a snowmobile. Shoot, what are those kids riding? I gotta get me one of those. And if you'd been there that day, you would have heard me calling out over the gentle wind, "I have to go pee!" When the toboggan finally stopped, the house was so far away, it looked like a place where ants would live. And I said, boys, I really gotta go. So Brave Face, he threw me up on his shoulders, and he started running back back to the farmhouse. And I said, you better run or I'm going to turn you into a popsicle. Well, then he knew, put her on the toboggan. It's a safer bet. And they were pulling me back to the farmhouse. Not so bumpy. Not so bumpy. Bumpy's not good. Then you've got to go. When they arrived back at the farmhouse, they called down from the top of the tunnel that we had dug. Hey, Mom, we've got little Leigh and she's got to go pee. Mom opened the door and I went flying down. Woohoo! And I landed in the kitchen with a bomb, bomb, bomb. Well, off went the hood. Bye-bye, took, shoom. Round and round went the scarf. Zip went the old rusty zipper. Kicked off the boots. Threw off the mitts and... Oh, I don't really have to go. False alarm. Now, at first, the boys were angry. But then they realized that they were pretty cold and maybe it was time to come inside. And as we sat there with our hot chocolate and the mini marshmallows and dipping fresh cookies from the oven, I think we all knew somewhere deep inside that that was going to be one of our best adventures. And I think it really is one of my finest memories, grown with maybe a lot of imagination. And it's probably one of my favorite stories from Twin Pines Farm near New Burketown, Manitoba. Not so long ago, but long enough to say that I will always tell it as a long ago story. Thank you for joining me, everyone. It's been my pleasure. I'm going to put up a farewell video now. Hopefully it will play for you. And stick around for it because there's some pictures of that red snowsuit, myself and my brothers. Let's hope it'll play. There we go. Bye, everyone.